the more you want to control the path by which this thing gets to an answer, you're probably going to start degrading some of its capability.
You're listening to the OneTrack Podcast.
All right, so welcome everyone to the OneTrack Podcast, where I have the pleasure of sitting down today with Brendon Geils from Athena Intelligence. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. We were standing outside a moment ago, and we're looking at PowerPoint. Why are you fascinated by PowerPoint?
We're fascinated by anything that entry-level employees do at our customers, and unfortunately, PowerPoint is one of the most classic parts of their day. From our perspective, there's a couple basic points of a person's day that I think are rote, including what you do in Excel and formatting or in PowerPoint. A lot of these are good candidates for AI agents to support people in doing it faster, higher quality.
So you guys are out there putting AI agents actually to work in the world. What kind of companies do you guys work with?
Yeah. So we work with primarily regulated industries. So for us, that's finance, legal, defense, healthcare, or Fortune 500s that have a higher brand risk if they let other vendors in with different security and permissioning models. So for me personally, I've been in the industry for a long time, held TS clearance with the US government, worked primarily with these types of industries. I have a certain liking to them. So as AI got more and more prevalent, it was clear that it wasn't an area a lot of people wanted to support. The mission was important to me, and I felt that we had a good mix of product market fit as well as team fit.
And as you think back about those early days, was there like a specific moment where you suddenly realized, oh, this AI thing is way more than just making funny poems and GPT? Like, where did you make that connection between talking to an AI and a chatbot and, potential business to be built?
I think that there was a few step changes. I'll give you the first one though, because I think it's kind of hilarious, and it's how we actually named the company. So we're Athena Intelligence. The acronym is of course AI, and I did not come up with that with myself. That was I think GPT 3.5 or the model immediately before it, and all I had said to it was effectively we're working with regulated industries. The defense sector was one of our first customers. Helped me come up with a name for an AI company. And they came up with this name. And I didn't really know what Athena was for like the Greek and Roman goddess. Looked it up, and it was the goddess of wisdom and war. So at the time, it made a ton of sense, and we've stuck to it. So that was a moment of, okay, this thing's going to make a lot of sense if you fast forward a couple of years.
So in many ways, AI really helped you not just be the core foundational technology of what you're bringing to your customers, but it helped you build the company.
Yeah.
You said something interesting though, like one of your first customers. How did you land your first customer? It sounds like a very complicated thing to get AI to a defense. You said defense? Like how do you do that? Like how do you get them to be your first customer?
I think everyone wants to be a customer of this technology. It's super clear from day one. The difficulty with a lot of these industries is they don't have someone to shepherd them through the process in a way that makes them feel comfortable with the deployment methodology. So for us, having people with backgrounds in the industry, being able to articulate exactly how these things are operating with the right permissioning and controls and audit for them was enough to get on board. I think as more and more time goes on, there's a lot of companies that are turning out a consumer or prosumer into supporting a true enterprise offering. From us, it was just a longer sales cycle and a longer deployment cycle, but both of those things in the long run, I think, pay off.
I think it definitely pays off, and we see similar things in our world too, right? Some of the companies that we work with they're big companies, and they have a lot of complexity just internally. Like, sure, everyone wants to have AI, everyone wants to work with AI, but oftentimes these organizations are just not even ready to assess whether or not they should implement one solution or the other. We live and breathe AI. We build these companies with AI every day, but to a company that makes chips, they don't. And so when you come to them and say, well, it's GPT so-and-so versus Anthropic so-and-so, they don't really understand that. So how do you bring that a bit closer to the end customer when they don't necessarily understand the nuances of the things that are so important to them?
Yeah. So I think early days we tried to sell into IT, we tried to sell into engineering and the technology groups. It was not a successful sales process. We've since pivoted all of our go-to-market motions and procurement motions to the business functions. So because of that, we don't walk in trying to describe our accuracy in RAG or some recent benchmark that an LLM hit and how our open source fine-tuned model potentially surpasses that. What we go in and try to prove out is ROI on a real task. And we have a forward deployed engineering team, which we took a lot of these same ideas from Palantir, a previous employer of mine, in order to help, again, shepherd them through that process. When I think of AI agents today, they are in the technology readiness period of the life cycle. They weren't 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we started. So what you had to do in the early days, in many ways, was either provide a very kind of small API-based product, or if you wanted to provide something a little more high level that does an end-to-end task, you had to supplement that with an FDE or solutions or other services around the product. So we did the latter. And because of that, we kind of grew with our customer the confidence to actually deploy more and more of this as an AI agent. Whereas today we can drop into a customer and there's probably 2 to 5% of the work that our FDE team has to continue to support. And most of it is actually backstopped by these agents.
It's fascinating. So this lesson of going from trying to sell to IT and engineering to actually sell to the business process owner, the actual person whose work you might be automating in some way. Do you have like an example or two of those early wins when you realized that was the way to go?
Yeah, there's an industry where there's basically 3 competitors and that they run the majority of the industry. First group, we had a direct tie-in with the C-suite, and they tied us over to the CTO and the CIO. We jumped on this big meeting, presented, and we ended up being in procurement for about 6 weeks with them, showing them all of our metrics, pipelines, evals, and they continued to ask more questions about why we weren't using MCPs, because that was the hot thing at the time, or why we weren't using some new RAG architecture that they saw on LinkedIn. And for us, it was always a tough thing because we fundamentally disagreed with the approach, but we had to almost give it airtime because this is a procurement process. One of the other competitors, we got entered through their business function. Within about 2 weeks, the business function said, if you can do this, we sign a pilot. We don't care how you do it. To you guys, the ROI makes sense to us. So it was very clear that the 2 companies that have effectively the same requirements coming in through one function versus the other immediately made sense given our product and FDE model. And after that, we just say no to anyone who's strictly IT focused. That being said, IT, technology, security, and all these functions have to be around the table. But I think starting with them typically is a difficult way to get budget as well as to get through the why are we buying this and what's the ROI process.
And I think oftentimes IT, they get involved. They used to evaluate point solutions. They're not used to evaluating a platform that you can actually use to do so many other things with as well, versus if you can find somebody who has a specific pain point or problem you're trying to solve, you can come in and say, pay me X $1,000 a month and I'll solve this problem for you without more people. That's sort of the approach. But I wonder, with the forward deployed engineer model, do you see that being the future of where the product is going as well, where sort of the FDE is supporting the implementation of the product? Because in many ways, you could build anything in a product like Athena.
Yeah, it actually is the perfect product exploration thesis. And in my eyes, you have a product, you want to explore different parts of your product, but you don't want to overinvest unless you know a customer is actually going to pay for it. So what we've taken to is you have a human FDE, basically explore that thesis with a customer. If it starts to show success, you then decide to roll that out to the fleet, or you do a go-to-market campaign against it. And this is how we've decided to build in certain product areas. And then you might ask yourself, okay, then how do you support the services and the solutions and the cost that it accrues from having more and more people? Because we're building an AI agent that can do generalist work, we actually fold all that back into our own agents. So we have a system of, we call them AI FDEs, very similar to Palantir's approach as well, in which anything that you're doing with a customer after you've kind of done that exploration, which should be a human doing that, getting human intuition, deciding what to invest in and what to divest, then you pass it over to the agent. So for us, it's a function of a startup cost, but then the cost gets inherited by the system.
So in a way, you were first on the FDE model before it became the cool thing to do. And now, while everyone is trying to do the FDE model themselves, you're moving to AI FDEs to automate the FDE work.
Yeah, maybe. I think, Yeah, I think the FDE models definitely got blown up in the last 3 months, and
Yeah.
we're definitely riding some coattails from that. But I'll give you one like other example, which we haven't had the opportunity to fully implement yet. But we decided 2 years ago, every meeting you have to have a meeting recorder on, and we have our own that we built out, and it attends every single meeting with everyone in our team, from our platform team, our product team, our go-to-market team. And it's just sitting there transcribing, providing you like post meeting report notes and whatnot, and Q&A. We are now entering this phase where we're allowing it to talk on calls as a supplement to an FDE or someone on the go-to-market team. You can imagine, probably Q1, Q2 of next year, we're going to start sending it to customer calls by itself, because it has 2 years of data on all the FDEs at our company and the go-to-market side. For those first 2 or 3 calls, you should be able to actually talk to an agent, and it's going to answer basic questions about our company.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this from your perspective, like I would be super excited about this, but if I'm the CTO, CIO at one of your customers, don't you think they might worry that, oh, this thing that I'm talking to has access to all the call recordings from all the customers for this vendor that I'm working with? Like, what's the risk of the agent accidentally saying, well, XYZ Logistics, we implemented this other thing at ZYX Logistics, and they say, oh, 5% productivity gain. Like, how do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah. So very, 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 very simple. It only pulls in the material that is allowed by that company or client or workspace. And then on top of that, I would argue it's actually more secure. It's tough for some people on the team to remember, hey, I talked about that with this customer versus that customer. So I think like writ large, this should be actually a more compliant system, articulating exactly what kind of the company stance is about various topics and capabilities, as well as being bespoke to them. And we're not looking to replace anyone on our team. If they want to talk to a human, like, we would love that. It gives us more data, just to like continue to improve our capabilities. However, there's just so many times when you're just, I don't want, like, I'm not going to bug Chris. Chris is busy. I just was on a call with him 20 minutes ago. You'll bug an agent because you know it's an agent.
Right.
So I think the operating experience with us as a vendor actually encourages people to give more feedback, which to us is like probably one of the hardest things, is getting real feedback from an enterprise. The feedback loop is so long. They're typically more airtight about that. Whereas a consumer market, they'll tell you the second a price change or a product feature isn't to their liking, an enterprise team kind of backs off a bit more until something's really hitting the fan.
Right. Like their engagement reduces, and then at some point they don't renew it.
Right now.
Basically. Yeah. Yeah. So your model, I mean, it's very similar to what we're striving for within OneTrack as well, is land and expand within companies, right? Like you get your foot in the door, you show them, here's some core functionality of what we can help you with. In our world, it would be safety, productivity, quality, maybe some optimization tasks in the warehouse. And then you say, well, you can do this at one site. Now we can do this at 40 sites.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, like, AI introduces another layer to that, where it's not just that you can get more data from 40 sites, but you can actually do not just 40 times more work, maybe 4,000 times more work, because every person can now talk to an AI to get a bunch of insights
Yep.
that they would need to usually talk to those 5 engineers or 10 engineers for. Now, in your world, it's kind of like, it's like individual work almost that you're automating for persons. Like, what does the land and expand motion look like for you guys? And how do you convince a customer on the return as they expand?
Yeah. Yeah. This is, I think, a really great area for AI products and companies versus traditional SaaS. Traditional SaaS, goal was like get a big, huge upfront renewal, when your contract, and then like try to like not do crazy amount of support and lose your profit margin. I think with AI products, what you find is, especially in the enterprise or the highly regulated spaces, it's so hard to get in that once you're in, the net investment of resources to get the next customer versus investing in the customer you already have, it makes so much sense to spend a lot of time on your current customer segment. And because our product specifically, and I think AI products generally, have a very flexible opportunity, it invites people to use them in various capacities. So example that I always like to give is there's a larger, close to 1,000-person law firm that we started working with last year, and kind of, they did 4 days of on-sites in 2 cities. Within those 4 days, I think we onboarded close to 50 to 60 individuals across 7 departments. Some of the departments I've never heard of and kind of how they operate, but to them, enough of the product in solutioning looked similar to say, we'll take that. IT's already approved it. We like the budget's already checked off, like, great, let's move forward. And then for us, over time, the next person that looks like our company that's knocking at their door has to go up against 7 departments now who've already used the product, started adopting it, have access to the memories and experiences that product has. And that's really hard from a competitive moat perspective for them to compete.
Right. Now, in order for that to be successful, you need to be effective at the change management side of all of this, right? The implementation is not just setting up the agent to do something, but also, in a way, you could say retooling the people or like retraining the people to ensure that they know how to work with and actually know how to interface with AI. How much time do your FDEs spend on that versus on the agents? Like, as you think about the amount of work your FDEs do in terms of fine-tuning agents versus people, what's the split there?
Probably not enough is my understanding. I think there's a couple things that we're experiencing. One is there's market leaders that are setting standards, and we're able to adopt standards. Classic one is a chat interface is now like the market standard for how things operate, and people are pretty familiar with how this works. From there, we try to adopt standards so that way we're not having to reteach someone something else. So when they're coming from a different product, it's pretty it translates nicely. I think the other one that we've experienced recently is for the people that do come over, trying to not have the AI product live in a different operating mode that they're used to. So a classic example is like if you're doing email, don't pull me into your new fancy SaaS product to do email, like just do email in my email. The same goes for Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all the tooling that they're used to. As much as that is we can push back into the core native products, allows our customers not have to think about it. But I think it is similarly an opportunity for people to reinvent the wheel and say, if we did start from like ground zero, how would we actually approach an AI native product? So we do have like one pretty heavy investment in that space, which is we call Spaces, which is like Bloomberg for all of your AI tooling. Besides that, we try to push as much of like the core product offering into our customers' native experiences.
It's interesting that you say this because I think last week or 2 weeks ago, Satya Nadella was talking about like the end state of all enterprise software is an inbox. Because in many ways, like we all are used to working from email, and then from email we might go to our Microsoft Word or to Outlook or to PowerPoint or to Excel, and I think it's so interesting that you mentioned the email example for the agents because we also found that people don't like to wait. Like the chat experience is great if you're trying to get that one-off response back. That's like an incremental look at some text and give you an answer back, but oftentimes work isn't that, right? I think it's like the fundamental difference between just a chat interface and back and forth with an LLM versus an actual agent doing work and they're going in and pulling data and loading things and analyzing things and then maybe even generating some output. Like I think in your guys' world, right? Like you're creating the PowerPoint example from earlier, like you're creating that for a person. And so if you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, like what that time should actually be spent doing something else. So the email flow has been really, really interesting to see as something that people start to embrace.
And it changes their like the types of questions they ask, the types of things that they want, because you don't have a latency requirement. Yeah, I'm interested to see like from your side, have you experienced different operating modes from your like customers because it's over email versus chat?
100%. I think one interesting observation there is that people will start firing off like 5, 10, 20 different requests that all run in parallel. And in your inbox, it's fine to do because by the time the response comes back, you can just work through it one by one. If you're in that traditional chat-like interface, I don't think anyone really has cracked the code on what does a multi-agent, human agent interface really look like. Like, sure, you can have like a bunch of chat boxes. I thought that Claude code in the browser is actually quite nice, where you can see the sessions and click into each session. But it's not really that intuitive, especially for someone who's not an engineer. Like,
Yeah.
Claude code in the browser makes sense for software engineers and developers, but
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to a supervisor on a factory floor.
Yeah.
But they're used to having a million emails in their inbox and they'll get to it when they can. But then when they can fire off 10, 15, 20 requests in parallel, you have to realize like it's not one person with one agent. It's actually one person with 15, 20 agents. So as we think about the future, there's 1 billion knowledge workers today. Some people say there will be 10 billion knowledge workers in a year. I think it could be 100 billion or maybe even way more than that, because everyone can just talk in parallel to this infinitely capable agentic system going off, doing work for you, retrieving data and giving you an answer rather than you having to do that nitty gritty work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we just hit some metrics internally, which was, I think 2 months ago, we had 10 billion tokens through OpenAI. And just last month, we did 10 billion at Anthropic in the last month.
Just in the last month.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of it was just due to there's models that are able to run for longer. There's more users that are doing more work. Like you said, they're parallelizing it. And one fun area that I think we found that users are parallelizing was actually in Excel, because we have the ability to call agents through an Excel type style interface. So they get an agent, and that's kind of like a row, and then they drag it down and they run like 15 of them or 20 of them, or I've seen 200 before. So I think there's like people have found out how to like use their old tools in ways that we have never expected, just because, someone in finance is like, hey, I don't want to use a product and learn how to do multi-agent, whatever, parallel work. But I know Excel. So if I can get it in here, like I can be really effective.
So we talk an awful lot about Microsoft Office products right now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So does that mean that like basically Microsoft and whoever owns the work environment is going to dominate, the future of agentic work in the enterprise?
I think in the short term, yeah. So my experience so far has been, when someone in our industry sits down, they open up a Windows computer, they have Outlook. If they're a lawyer, they open Word. If they're in consulting, they open PowerPoint. And if they're in finance, they open Excel. And they basically hang out on those 4 products all day long, maybe an internet browser. Because these agents are currently supplementing work, so you're working and it's kind of slowly adding to your work, you want majority of your work to be in that interface you're used to. Now, what I think is going to happen probably end of next year, and then definitely the following year, is people will get so used to these products doing end-to-end work that they don't need to be in their historically traditional application, because that's where you're not working anymore. You're now doing a verification loop. And there's very clear precedent for this. If I'm sure you guys use coding products. When I first used a coding product 3 years ago when they were coming out, it was autocomplete in VS Code, right? And it was an IDE, and the whole team was using this. And then Cursor came out, and this was like amazing, but it was still an IDE, and it was still just continuing to be an agentic version of like your traditional IDE. In the last 2 weeks, I just checked this before we got on here, merged over 65 Devons, which is the Cognition AI's agent, and I haven't opened my Cursor ID in those 2 weeks. So that's an example of just like the ID historically was everything to me in the team, and now personally, I just don't open my ID. Everything goes to Devon, and then we have a number of engineers on our team that like still do like ID based work. Yeah, but I'm not working on those types of problems anymore. So I think the knowledge worker will experience that same thing, where their IDE is the Microsoft Office suite. But next year, the agent's doing so much work, you don't need to have the whole suite open to check the work, give it a little guidance, and move it on.
It's interesting because in your world, right, the software products that you described, that's something that a lot of people are very familiar with. In our world with OneTrack, we're trying to oftentimes bridge the gap from a green screen AS400 system that was somehow set up in the late 90s, early 2000s, running on-prem somewhere. And then they're not even using Excel for that stuff, right? Like they're literally logging into a remote, terminal, and then somebody's typing in commands there to load some list of orders or items or inventory information. And we find that, actually those kinds of customers have ended up building a lot of these like data warehouse kind of systems before it even like their work is happening basically in some kind of Power BI flow kind of tool sitting on top of a snowflake thing. And they're used to building dashboards as their work, right? A lot of the work that engineers would do at a manufacturing company or logistics companies, build a dashboard on top of some data and things like that. Do you guys do anything related to data itself like that as well? Or are you more focused on like the actual like work completion within a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint or a document?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think we do both. Recently what I've found though is the teams that their job is to build the pipeline, they're a tougher audience than the team that just needs to leverage the pipeline output.
What do you think that is?
Because I think you have to shoehorn this technology into their business practice rather than just get to the outcome, right? So I think like a classic example is if you want to do an anomaly detection team, there's a person who's in charge of doing the data pipeline for anomaly detection, and they're huge fans of DBT and Snowflake, and they don't want to use anything else. So if we came in there and we sold to that person, we'd be building on the DBT stack, on Snowflake, no questions asked. If we sold to the anomaly detection lead and we said, we'll get you the same numbers, the same dashboards, we have a pipeline, but you don't care how we get there, there's probably a shorter path that an AI is more capable of. We have a better integration to, or any of these kind of like standards. I saw a podcast probably 2 weeks ago where they were talking about the explainability trade-off. I think this is like one of the real problems we have, which is the more you want to control the path by which this thing gets to an answer, you're probably going to start degrading some of its capability.
I've seen it a lot in prompting. Yes. You start with a very simple prompt that isn't even in complete sentences to describe what you want to happen, and it does it. And then you run into some edge case and you throw the edge case into Claude and you say, hey, refine this prompt to like make sure it doesn't do that. Okay, great. You do that 3-4 more times before you know it. It's a prompt that's like 3 pages long of all these guardrails, and then you end up in some new edge case again, and the agent ends up doing a bunch of work that A, it didn't have to do, but you told it to do it. B, confuses it because the context window gets longer and longer. And I think, well, the first 40% really of the context window is really, the part where you can generate great responses, and then it decays very quickly after that. So like the more you put into there, the more steps you add, the worse the work gets actually. How do you guys reconcile that? I mean, how do you ensure that, especially when you build these like solutions for your customers with your FDEs, that you're not over constraining the AI from actually just doing what it's kind of trained to be great at?
Yeah, it's funny. I think almost all the problems we face today are no different than what a human faces at these companies. Everyone knows about the like company they worked at 5 years ago, and their boss would come in and say, I need this done. I want it in APA style format. I want it on my desk, and you have to use this. And you're kind of like, why do you care? Like, just let me do my job. I know how to do it. I'm like a smart, capable person. And I think we're in that same storyline for these agents, which they're so capable, but people have like historically a way of doing things that they're like, this is how I want it done. And it's actually more frustrating on both sides because it's harder for the agent, it's harder for the person. So I think it's no different than if you're a human, which is you need some level of leadership buy-in to say, hey, we do have to like do digital transformation, which is an overused term, but in this case, I do think like has some relevance to say maybe the way we do it isn't the best way for these agents. We could shoehorn it all the way in, or maybe we kind of like let up the gas a bit on these 2 or 3 things.
Basically define the outcome and let the agent work.
Yeah.
Which is probably a bit opposite to what some CIOs, CTOs would love to hear, because they want all the controls in the world to control what it does.
Yeah.
But no, it turns out that if you add too many controls, you're somewhat taking away the intelligence.
Yeah. The one that I always hear on the first call, and I think like it's hard to get people out of their head, like especially on the first call, is, hey, I don't think we have a ton of repeatable workflows. I don't think your tool is going to be a good candidate for us. And I think my first response is always, we don't want to be doing repeatable workflows. Like that's probably not where we're going to be best suited, because there's probably cheaper solutions that are more RPA based, and historically technology has done a really good job there, especially SaaS. We're probably going to be better at the like creative, more unique, more open-ended, more edge cases style work that you guys just don't want to do because it's it's requires you to do work at odd hours. It's requires a lot of like different bespoke systems. I think these models are really good at that, but people haven't got it in their heads yet to say, no, AI does repeatable workflows.
So switching gears just a little bit, as you work with your customers, you talked about, the economics of what you do a little bit. And first, a little bit of a philosophical question. How do you feel about the amount of work that you're automating? Like, do you sometimes like sit back and reflect on, oh wow, like what I built and what my team built is, taking away so many hours out of people's days and just doing it on its own?
I think there's like two different versions of that I think is happening. One is we're a cost reduction for hours that exist. The other thing I would argue though is we are doing work that would not have happened if there wasn't an ability to do it. A good example is due diligence. There's almost 60 to 70% of our customers do some type of due diligence workflow. Due diligence to them is they have a bunch of data and they have to procure an opinion with a bunch of citations around an investment or a particular partnership or opportunity. For them, they typically hand this to a first year, second year to take a first pass. This person spends, 80, 100, 120 hours a week really just diving into a bunch of historical material and then finding a bunch of edge cases to kind of draw out. They don't like this work. This is not encouraging for them. And I think at the end of the day, they typically can't even do it enough
They don't get
in order for like you to have like a good decision coming out of this. So this is a classic example of when we come in and support on diligence, they don't do less diligence. They do more diligence. They are able to get to answers faster. They're able to do more deals because of that. And they're able to also level up people out of the PowerPoint formatting job that they had for the first year into roles that I think are more human-esque, which is going on site, meeting and doing diligence at the manufacturing plant that you're potentially looking to acquire, or going to Berlin to figure out, is this car supplier actually what they say they are, and not just behind a desk all day.
So in other words, if your fear of eliminating work is too big, then your scale of ambition is too small because there's so much more you could do in your business.
Yeah, I think like as we see it so far, people are just doing more. Like I think of like my day to day, we're not hiring any less just because we have the ability to do tons of AI employees and all this work. We're hiring more and we're hiring faster.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Do you think the systems will have to integrate before these AI tools are successful? Or do you think the AI tools are going to get so good so fast that leave the data where it's at, we're going to come to you in a year or two?
So I'm firmly convinced that the system should stay, but we're going to make away with the application layer. Because the application layer, the part of the application that end users actually interface with to see the data in the systems,
Yeah.
who builds that? Consultants, integrators.
Mhm.
You spend, like, if you want to implement an ERP, sure, you can get a quote for, either it's hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of billions of dollars to get the license from the software vendor, depending on the scale of your company. But then you're going to pay 5 to 10 to 20 times that much to consultants to implement it. And implementation is not just training your team to use it and defining your business process. It literally means like building the screens and configuring the forms and the inputs and the outputs. And so I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity right now. As long as you can get to the data in the systems, it's fine. Like transactional data, if you move it into your SQL database or have it in their SQL database, doesn't make that big of a difference. But where the value is right now is if you can look across systems and bring all that data into a single place. And I think agents are actually uniquely capable of understanding how data maps between systems. People oftentimes don't realize it, but ultimately a human design does database schema, right? So just because in the old world, you'd have to have an engineer sit down and write some kind of data transformation function to map from your CRM to your ERP and to your WMS, an agent doesn't need a human to write that for it. As long as it can see the data, it can figure out how these fields over here relate to these fields over there and those fields over there. And I think there's a massive opportunity in that world. And we're just really scratching the surface right now because everyone's enamored by that chat interaction and, really like task automation. But I think there's a whole nother layer around seeing and building across systems in the enterprise where traditional software just isn't set up and designed to support that.
We always hear, hey, we can't start a pilot or a contract yet. Our data is like messy or well, our data is not there yet. Do you guys face this? And like, what is your response?
All the time. I mean, that's why we exist, because our customers don't know what's going on. The very systems designed to help them operate are actually holding them back. And our approach is try to be as incremental and simple as possible in that way and getting data out. So our customer can literally sign up and start sending CSV files via email on a schedule to a dedicated receiving inbox.
Nice.
You don't need IT to do that. You just need an analyst who's probably already doing that because they're sending themselves transaction data and turning it into some, it's a, Excel spreadsheet, or maybe it's a Tableau report or something like that. They're already doing that. But instead of that data going to the analyst, let's have that data go to an AI to ingest and analyze for you.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunity. Well, last part I wanted to end on here is if you talk to somebody who's running, a complex organization, maybe in a regulated industry, and they want to, they have this mandate, right? They want to use AI. They have to use AI. They're being told, why are you not using AI? What advice do you give them? And specifically, what advice do you give them to understand what is hype versus reality and where they should start?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, to your point, every board is getting asked, hey, to their CEO, what's our AI strategy and how are we implementing it? I think for the most part, a lot of the things you probably would tell them 5 or 10 years ago still apply. Hey, data's a moat. Our people are a moat. These are important kind of pieces to our business. Protect those two first and foremost. And I think thereafter, brand risk and cyber risk are kind of like the second buckets where I tell people, move fast, try things, but also like for these groups, I think that is probably one of the more important parts that they do take hold. And then after that, I think the areas where we help like delineate what's hype versus reality is typically trying to tie it to a business function. So for us, again, proof is in the pudding, doing a pilot, seeing referrals from other folks that we're working with or other teams we're working with have historically just been the most important parts for us, and not trying to tie it to the technology. Because I think it's very, very easy to get excited about the technology right now. Demos are very easy to spin up, but the reality of being able to build a demo for a particular team is different than an AI governance and change management strategy that applies to your finance function, your recruiting function, your HR function.
You're absolutely right. You have to be thoughtful, but I think you can't miss the train, because if you miss this train, there might not be another train to come. So
Yeah. Nope.
the time is now for AI. Brendon, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. It was a fascinating discussion. People want to find you. Where can they find you or Athena?
Yeah, we're athenaintel.com. Add us on LinkedIn and check us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.